Mom shouted. Your kid stole the $10,000 from the safe. My sister lost it. We saw him near the safe. My son looked scared. I said, it's nothing, just place the security footage drive on the table. 5 minutes later, her husband's face went pale. The first time it was just $100. My mom thought she misplaced it. It had been in her wallet that morning, and by the time we were clearing plates after Sunday dinner, it was gone. She mentioned it lightly, like it was no big deal. But the way her eyes skimmed the room said otherwise. No one said anything. We all just nodded, changed the subject, and moved on. The second time, $300 disappeared from Dad's study drawer. That one was harder to brush off. He always locked that drawer, and only family had access to the house. Still no accusations. Just an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air the next time we all sat down for dinner. The third time was when things got weird. $500 gone from my sister Lauren's purse. She said it vanished while she was upstairs changing the baby. She didn't say it outright, but her eyes flicked toward me and my son Mason. That was when I knew something had shifted. Mason is 11, smart, quiet, loves drawing and video games. We spend a lot of time at my parents' house. After my divorce, they started helping me out with groceries, school fees, and sometimes rent. It was never spoken out loud, but I knew Lauren resented that. Her husband Keith resented it even more. After that third incident, my dad bought a safe, one of those heavy fireproof ones you bolt to the wall. Digital keypad. He installed it behind a shelf in his office. He told me he'd only given the code to Mom, Lauren, and Keith. Not me, not Mason. Didn't bother me. I just wanted the drama to stop, but it didn't. Money kept disappearing. At first, small amounts, then larger. 2004. And then last week, $10,000 gone in one sweep. All hundreds clean. No sign of forced entry, nothing missing from the house except the cash. That night, no one touched their food. You could hear forks clinking, drinks being sipped just to fill the silence. Dad kept checking his phone. Mom barely looked up. Mason just picked at his mashed potatoes. Lauren and Keith were dead silent, not even pretending anymore. And then yesterday, it all blew up. We were sitting in the living room. The baby was napping upstairs. The TV was playing some random cooking show in the background. I was helping Mom sort through the mail. Dad had gone to his office to check something in the safe again. And then Mom turned to me and said it. Your kid took the missing 10 grand from the safe. Just like that. No warning, no build-up. She said it like it was fact. Everything stopped. Mason had just come in from the backyard. He froze like someone had cut the oxygen in the room. Then Lauren jumped in. We saw him near the office twice. He was watching you open the safe, Mom. Don't act surprised. No one moved. Keith kept his eyes on the TV like he wasn't hearing any of it. I didn't yell. I didn't defend him. I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Set it down right in the middle of the coffee table. Told them it was footage. The past month, motion-activated camera installed in the ceiling of Dad's office, hidden inside a fake smoke detector. With Dad's permission, he'd been the one to suggest it. Actually, after the second big theft, he didn't know who to trust anymore. Every time the office door opened, it recorded. Every time someone touched the safe, it recorded. Every night the files got emailed to me. Dad took the drive and disappeared into the den without saying a word. I followed him. Lauren stood up, hesitated, then sat back down. Keith didn't move. Mason looked terrified. I told him to wait. Dad plugged it into the computer. The file was labeled with the exact date the 10 grand went missing. 5 minutes into the footage, it was obvious. The camera caught him entering the office at 2:14 a.m., punching in the safe code, taking the stacks of hundreds and stuffing them into a black duffel bag. Come clean like he'd done it before. I heard the floor creak behind me, turned around. Keith was standing in the doorway, pale as chalk. He didn't say a word, just turned around and walked out the front door. Keith didn't come home that night. After the footage played, he just walked out. No jacket, no explanation, no apology. The door shut behind him, and the sound of it echoed through the house like a gunshot. Lauren stood there frozen, holding her phone like it might tell her what to do. Mom mumbled something about the baby upstairs and disappeared. Dad stayed glued to the screen, replaying the video in disbelief. Mason went quiet. I tucked him into the guest room later, and he fell asleep clutching his stuffed bear like he used to when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. When I came back downstairs, the only light came from the computer monitor. Dad was sitting there staring at a paused frame. Keith's hand reaching into the safe, his face caught perfectly in the corner of the shot. I could see Dad's reflection in the screen. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. He asked how long the camera had been up. I told him since August. I had installed it one afternoon while everyone was out. Mom had taken Mason to the park. Lauren was at her prenatal checkup, and Keith was supposedly working late. Dad had been the only one who knew. We agreed we needed proof one way or another. Dad just nodded. Didn't say anything else. The next morning, Keith's car was gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. Lauren sat at the kitchen table in her robe, scrolling her messages again and again. Her eyes were red and puffy. She didn't look at me until I set a cup of coffee down in front of her. She asked if I was proud of myself. Said I didn't have to trap him like that. Trap him. That's the word she used. I told her I didn't trap anyone. The footage just showed the truth. She didn't reply, but I could tell she didn't believe that yet. Dad called us into the dining room around noon. He looked exhausted. The table was covered with printouts, frames from the footage, timestamps, even one photo where Keith's tattoo was visible as he grabbed the envelope of cash. He laid them out like evidence in a courtroom. Mom wouldn't look at the pictures. She just sat there rubbing her temples. Dad said he wasn't calling the police. Not yet. But Keith was done. No more help. No access to the safe. No shared accounts. Nothing. He was going to protect the family first. Then he turned to Lauren, told her she needed to decide where her loyalty was. Lauren didn't answer. She just looked at Mason, then at me, then back at the papers. That night, Keith still didn't show up. The next morning, Lauren's debit card got declined buying diapers. When she checked the account, everything was gone. Keith had emptied it, savings, checking, everything. That was the moment it hit her. She sat in the hallway holding her phone, whispering his name over and over like saying it enough times would make him come back. By that evening, she finally came to my room. She asked to see all the footage, every file. I didn't argue. I opened the folder on my laptop and let her watch in silence. The room was so still that the sound of her breathing felt loud. Halfway through the video, she covered her mouth and started shaking. It wasn't just one night. He'd done it 3 times. Same bag, same routine. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but there it was. She left without saying anything. Later, when I checked on her, she was lying on her bed, still in her clothes. The baby asleep next to her. Her phone screen lit up every few minutes with messages from unknown numbers. Probably Keith's gambling buddies or whoever he owed money to. 2 days later, she filed for divorce. Mom cried when she found out. Dad didn't. He just said he should have trusted his instincts sooner. That's when I learned something else. Keith had borrowed money from Dad a month before all this started. $10,000. Said it was for a short-term investment. Dad never saw a cent of it again. It all made sense now. The disappearing money wasn't random. Keith had been stealing to cover his debts, trying to make up for what he'd lost at the casino. Lauren didn't talk to me for a while after that, but when she finally did, she said the words I'd been waiting for. You were right. She told me about the last text he sent her. Tell your sister she wins. Then he blocked her. Keith disappeared after that, like he'd never existed. No one said the word run, but that's what it was. He fled, from responsibility, from Lauren, from the chaos he'd caused. I don't think he ever thought he'd get caught, and I'm certain he never expected me to be the one to catch him. After that final text, his number went dead. His Instagram vanished. His name disappeared from the online poker forums Dad found when he started digging. It was like he'd erased himself and slipped into the shadows. Lauren unraveled for 3 days. She'd cry in waves, like the pain hit her fresh every hour. She kept saying she didn't understand. Things were rough, but not this bad. She'd loved him. Just the night before, he'd held their baby like everything was fine. Then, abruptly, the tears stopped. She turned cold, determined. I saw her transform in real time. She moved back into her old room, refused every offer of help, and took on everything alone. Diapers, feedings, laundry, job applications. She wasn't loud about her anger anymore. She just shut everyone out, too guarded to let anyone comfort her. Mom dealt with it by pretending it never happened. She dodged talk of the footage and changed the subject whenever Keith's name came up. She called it a rough patch, as if he'd spilled coffee instead of stealing $10,000 and abandoning his wife and child. Dad, though, faced it head-on. One morning, I found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, paper scattered. He was on the phone with his lawyer, voice low but resolute, cutting Keith out of everything. insurance, the will, power of attorney, the family trust. All gone. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "He used us all." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, just our last name scrawled in Keith's handwriting. Inside, a note. I tried. I really did. No apology, no explanation, just a motel receipt from somewhere near Reno, dated 2 days after he left. Lauren saw it and didn't even blink. She handed it to Dad and walked away like it was junk mail. Later, when I asked if she wanted to talk, she said, "What's left to say?" After that, she started cutting people out of her life like dead weight. Anyone who doubted Mason, anyone who'd made snide remarks about me, anyone who pitted her for staying with Keith so long. Gone. I noticed small changes, too. Mason wouldn't go upstairs alone anymore. He stopped mentioning Keith entirely, even when I brought him up gently. He was still his sweet self, but quieter now. I knew what that meant. I told Dad I was thinking of getting Mason a therapist. He nodded and said it was a good idea. Then he paused, took off his glasses, and said something unexpected. I thought it might be him at first. I didn't get it. He looked me in the eye and added, "When the money started disappearing, I looked at Mason differently. I hate myself for that." I didn't say it, but I'd felt it too. The way Mom triple-checked her purse when Mason was around. The way Lauren glanced at him when something went missing. No one said it out loud, but they thought it. They thought my son was a thief. A few nights later, Lauren asked to take Mason to the park, just the two of them. She didn't explain why. When they returned, she handed him a bag with 3 tubs of ice cream, chocolate, mint chip, and that odd mango flavor he loves. She said he'd pick them out. When Mason went to the kitchen, she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." And I believed her. Life didn't snap back to normal, but it started to take a new shape. Quieter mornings, fewer arguments, even dinners without tense silences. We were still fractured, but we were piecing ourselves back together, bit by bit. Keith was gone, and honestly, none of us wanted him back. By October, the house felt calmer, a fragile kind of peace, like the quiet after a storm. We still avoided saying Keith's name, like we'd erased him from existence. Lauren stepped into single motherhood like she'd been training for it. She was stronger, sharper, but gentler with Mason. Mom still hovered around him, as if trying to make up for every suspicious glance. Dad kept busy fixing things, doorknobs, shutters, the gate, like keeping his hands moving could stop his mind from lingering on what went wrong. We weren't whole, but we were holding on. Then Dad suggested a family dinner. He said we needed one night to reset, no damage control, no unspoken grudges, just a meal together. He picked a Sunday, like the ones we used to have, and told Mom to go all out. She did. Roast chicken, twice-baked potatoes, the bread Mason loves, even a dusty bottle of wine she'd saved since 2009. Mason helped set the table. Lauren dressed the baby in a onesie with tiny gold stars. Dad wore his old watch. It felt almost surreal. We laughed more than I expected. Lauren and I reminisced about old family trips. Mason made a silly comment about how the baby's forehead looked like Keith's, and we all froze, then burst out laughing. It was the kind of joke you only make when the pain has started to fade. Then Dad stood up and brought out a small wooden box. He looked at me and said, "This is overdue." Inside was a check for $10,000. I stared at it. He said it wasn't about repayment. It was about acknowledging they'd failed Mason by doubting him. Lauren looked like she might cry. Then she stood, glass in hand, and said she had a confession. "I told Mom I thought it was Mason," she said, her voice steady. Weeks before the $10,000 vanished. I didn't see anything. I just said it because it was easier than suspecting someone else. The room went silent. Mason, still looking at his plate, said quietly, "I knew." It broke the air for a moment. Lauren sat down and said she was sorry, not just for letting Keith steal the money, but for letting him steal their trust. She looked at me, then Dad, and said she'd been too scared to face the truth back then, and that fear had cost her everything. I was about to speak when Mom glanced out the window toward the street. She froze. "There's someone outside," she said. We all turned. Dad opened the door, and there, under the porch light, stood Keith. He looked like a ghost of himself, gaunt, sallow, clothes wrinkled and loose, a black duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a sneaker with a hole in the toe. He didn't speak, didn't wave, just stared at the house like he wasn't sure it was real. Lauren went still. Mason stood behind me. Keith didn't approach. He pulled something from his coat, walked halfway up the driveway, and dropped it on the welcome mat. Then he turned and walked away. No words, no explanation. Dad waited until he was gone, then picked up the envelope. Inside was a mess: casino chips, pawn slips, withdrawal receipts, IOUs scribbled on bar napkins, a hotel key card. But one thing stopped us cold: a pawn slip for Lauren's wedding ring, the one she'd hidden in the back of her closet after the split, under a pile of baby blankets. She hadn't even noticed it was gone. He'd been back in the house. We didn't know when or how, but he'd been inside. That changed everything. Dad had the locks changed that night. Not just keys, but new deadbolts, security cameras for the front and back. I watched Mason while the locksmith worked. Lauren stayed in her room, feeding the baby, her phone on silent. That night, Dad called me and Lauren into the den and shut the door. He pulled out a folder with legal documents his lawyer had prepared, a formal declaration cutting Keith out of everything: the business, the will, insurance, financial assets, access rights, emergency designations. All of it. Dad handed Lauren a pen and said, "This is permanent." She signed without hesitation. Then she looked at him and said, "Make sure he never gets near my son." He nodded. The rest of us followed suit. Even Mom, who'd been emotionally sidestepping the whole ordeal, finally stepped up. She walked into the den unprompted and told Dad to secure her accounts too. Everything. She didn't want to find out years later that Keith had used her identity to open a credit line somewhere like Ohio. It was the first time I'd seen Mom angry. Christmas came and went. We tried to make it normal. Lights, gifts, smiles that didn't last long. Mason got a sketchbook and markers. It was the first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. Then, just after New Year's, the call came. They found Keith in a motel in Nevada, overdose, alone. No ID, no wallet, just a broken phone with one unsent message. Lauren didn't cry. We buried him quietly. No music, no crowd, just family and cold air. It felt less like grief and more like closure. Afterward, the house went silent. No TV, no music. Then one night, I found Lauren in the garage, throwing away his things, photos, cards, his jacket. I didn't stop her. Slowly, she started moving again, making breakfast, joining a mom group, finding small pieces of normal life. Dad worked in the garage, Mom baked, Mason claimed the guest room as his own. Little wins. Then Lauren found an apartment, small but hers. We had pizza on paper plates and, for the first time since Keith died, laughed again. A few days later, a letter arrived, no return address. It was from Keith. He wrote that he was sorry, that he tried, that he loved the baby but didn't know how to stop. Lauren folded the letter and said, "I'll tell the baby one day." Spring came quietly. Life started to bloom again. Lauren made her apartment warm and alive, even named her plants after old cartoons. She got a job at a pediatric clinic, her first in years. We celebrated with cupcakes and laughter. That night, she said, "I'm not scared anymore." Things weren't perfect, but they were good. And that was enough.